Alright, so this is another sort of mini project. And we're going to create, as I'd mentioned, we'll create like a portal effect. Okay, so something like that. So essentially this is just the same thing that we saw in the previous lesson, which is using a volume advect, which is moving our particles. So this is the smoke simulation that we have. So if I just play that, this is what is actually going on. Now this is pretty low res, because the nice thing about particle advection is your smoke simulation doesn't need to be very high resolution. But you can do it separately and then composite it later. But right now what we want is just to use the smoke sim to move our particles. So this is the final result that we want. Alright, so let's get started. So we're going to primarily spend time creating the smoke sim, and then the particle simulation is pretty simple. So what I have is I have a circle which is running my primary sort of smoke simulation. So I'm just going to take that, okay, just to have the same starting base, and I'll create a geometry and I'll just paste in the circle. Okay, so what I want to do is, firstly, let's give it orientation along curve. This will dictate my because we sort of want the smoke to spin around, right? So this orientation will dictate the spinning. And what I also want to do is come into additional rotation and just take the yaw, okay, and like point them inwards. So it sort of spins inwards. Like you can also spin it outwards if you want, but we'll have it spin inwards, okay. And then I can just take a wrangle and transfer this to velocity. So we'll do at v is equal to at n. Okay, the next thing is I want to animate this sort of forming. So I'll take a carve and I'll just animate this. So I'll take a carve and we'll do first and second, and we want to animate this. So start at 0 and end at 24. So we just get that. So this is fine. So this is our basic animation. Okay, now if you've never done smoke simulations, then I would suggest watching my intro to smoke simulation series on YouTube. There are 4 videos right now, and that should be enough to get you started with what we're doing. We're just doing one additional thing, which is we're generating a velocity field. But other than that, everything that I'm doing here has been covered in a lot of detail in my intro to smoke series. Okay, so once you've done this much, we're going to take a pyro source, which will allow us to convert this into a smoke simulation. And this is all fine. The only thing I need to do is I need to create 3 attributes, which is for emitting the smoke. So we need the density, we need the temperature. The temperature defines how much the smoke rises, and then we want velocity because we have velocity on this. Okay, so if you just set this to source smoke, it will automatically create density and temperature, and then you create plus, and then we can set up velocity. So it will generate velocity as well. Or actually, the interesting thing is, even if you don't do this, okay, you already have the velocity on the points. So you don't need to generate a separate attribute, because I think what that will do is it will actually just reset the velocity, right? If we take a visualize and press V, and if I remove this, yeah, it's the same thing, right? So you don't need to create that, like our velocity field is already there. Okay, then the next thing is I want to randomize the smoke emission a little bit. So I'll just take an attribute noise, and we're going to randomize the density and the temperature. Okay, so I'll just take this, I'll do 1D and multiplicative and take density and temperature, and I can do a remap and we'll make it animated. So once this is done, I can just take a rasterize. So we'll take a rasterize attribute and we can just set this up. So we want density, temperature and V, and that should give us everything that we want. You'll see it sort of forming, and you can also see the noise sort of animating through it. And the only thing I want is I want to get the particle scale down to about 0.5. So it's not very thick. And we'll keep the voxel size to 0.05. Right, so this is it. This is what we have. Okay, I can take, let's take the minimum and sort of bring it up a little. Yeah, so this is good. All right, so now the only thing left is to set up the actual simulation. So let's take a Pyro solver and I can just plug this in. And if we just press play, then we should have our smoke simulation. Okay, so we want to do a couple of things. Firstly, let's get the voxel size to 0.05. So we have a little more detail in here, which is good. Okay, then the sourcing doesn't need to change because all of it has already been sort of brought in for us. Okay, like it has the temperature and the density. We don't need the burn because that is primarily for fire. We don't have any fire. It has also brought in the velocity. Okay, so all of this is good. Now, let's start setting this up. So I need to make a few changes in order to make it look better. So the first thing I want is I want the smoke to be a little cold. So I want it to fall down. And I also want it to collide with the ground. So we're going to take the treat Y and change it to closed below. So the ground will be closed. Okay, my circle is slightly above the ground, which is good. Okay, like I moved it slightly above the ground. The next thing I want is I want to come to solving, and in the simulation you have the reference temperature. The reference temperature, if it is lower than the ambient temperature, makes the smoke fall down. So I'm going to take the reference temperature down to around, let's try 10. So it's like really cold. Okay, and if I press play, you'll see this happening, which is, see, you can see the smoke starting to fall down. Okay, the next thing is I want it to last a little longer. So come to the shape tab, okay, in simulation, like solving and shape, and then lower this down to 0.05. So this will just have the smoke last fairly long. Yeah, see. Maybe a little bit longer. Let's try 0.1. Yeah, so this is good. Okay, the next thing is we also want it to die out fairly quickly. So around say frame 70. So I'm going to get the simulation, get the timeline down to about 150 frames. Okay, and let's, like if you click down here, okay, like the little brain icon, that stops the dynamic calculation temporarily. So I'm going to come to frame 72. We'll come to sourcing, and let's say what I want is I want a lot of smoke in the beginning. So I'm going to take this to about 10. Okay, and then I'll come to around say 85 and I'll get it to 0. So from 70 to 80, it'll eventually die out. So if I press play, we should get something decent looking. See, so now we have a lot of smoke, and it's okay if it spreads out. Like eventually this is all just for having, you know, particles spinning out, and there you go. So the, you know, smoke eventually dies out. Okay, so this is good. Like we have this forming and it spins around and then it dies out. Okay, now let's start adding a little bit of sort of noise and turbulence into it. So we'll again come to shaping. I'll take the disturbance. I'll keep it to, let's keep it around 0.2. Okay, 0.25 is fine. I'll take the turbulence and make it slightly higher. So let's try around 0.5 and let's press play. Yeah, so this gives us a little more variation on the whole thing. Now another thing you can do is in order to visualize this is I can come to my object level and I can create a light. So let's create a light over here. You know, let's just come to the beginning, and we'll move it in the middle over there. Yeah. And then you can just, you know, turn off visibility for it. So what will happen is you'll get to see it a little bit more. See, there you go. Like it looks a little better, like easier to visualize. Okay, another thing I want to do with turbulence is I want to lower the noise size. So the swirl size, I want to get it fairly low and also lower the grain. And Yeah, this should give me like fairly fine. See, the smoke looks pretty noisy now. Okay, so the next thing is I wanted to pull towards the back, like it's a portal forming. So like there's a path that, that it is forming for something to come through. So that is fairly simple. We're going to use a curve force. Okay, so the same thing that we were doing for particles is also available for the pyro solver. So all we need is a line. So I'm just going to take a line and I'm going to point it in the Z direction. And let's just move it. So let's just make it like -1 in Z. So it's like pointing, towards the back. We'll keep it around here and a little bit of length. You don't need to have any points because the curve force will resample it automatically. And then I can just take let's take a null and we'll call it out curve. Okay, so in order to apply the curve force, you need to come into the pyro solver. Okay, so just jump into the pyro solver and you'll get an option called force output and you can connect your forces in there. So just take a gas curve. Like if you type in curve, you'll get two options. You'll get pop curve and gas curve. So you need the gas curve. Okay, so just take the gas curve and then pick the curve. So we have this and it will automatically sort of generate this for you. So we need to make a few changes. Like firstly, come to shaping and we don't want it to be like narrow over here. So just take this up all the way. So it kind of, does that. So this will allow us to pull it. And then we want to, I'll just increase the global scale a little bit and increase the maximum radius to around, let's try around 1.4. And also a little bit of air resistance. Okay, now let's just come into guides and lower the trail length. Okay, let's see what we're getting. So if I press play, like it should start to pull it in. Yeah, there we go. See, this looks nice. But now the problem is it's like pulling the whole thing in and nothing is falling down. Like the gravity is gone. Like it looks nice. Like this is a pretty good portal. But what I want is a little bit of a mix. So what I can do is I can take the radius and lower it till it's sort of just on the inside. Okay, so I'll get it down to around, let's say around 0.8, yeah, or 0.9. So what that should do is the outer stuff will still sort of fall down and the inner stuff will get pulled in. See, so you'll get this. So you get a mix of both. I can turn off the guides. I can turn off show guide geometry. There you go. So what's happening is you're getting like the pull towards the back, but you're also getting the smoke falling on the ground, okay, which looks a little bit better. Okay, now let's make a few minor additions. Like I don't want it to suck in so much. So let me just lower that a little bit. And I think the rest is fine. Yeah, so this gives us a nice little look overall. So it's relatively easy to set up. Then you can sort of add more turbulence or whatever. So I'll let it calculate through. Okay, let's do one thing. Let's just come here and what you want to do is depending on how much RAM you have on your system, you want to come to the simulation tab and increase the memory cache. Okay, because it's just, I think by default it's kept to like 5000 MB, which is really not enough. So let's get it to around 10. So it should allow us to store the entire simulation in RAM, and I'll get this to around 0.04. So let me just hit let me go to the last frame and let it calculate the whole thing. Yeah, so there you go. So this is our basic portal. Okay. Pretty decent, like nothing too complicated to make. Then you can sort of like, depending on, how much detail you want, you can get the voxel size down and add more detail to it, all of that stuff. Okay. But for a basic setup, this is, perfectly fine. Okay, now let's use this and we will set up the particle network. Okay, so the particle network is, we're going to pick it up from here itself. So I'll take the carve that we have and I'm going to put in a sweep. So I'll just put in a sweep here and set it to round tube. So we should have this, except you need to figure out how thick you want it. So it should be slightly thinner than, what we have. So about that much. Okay, and then we'll also give it like an end cap. So single polygon. Yeah, so this is good. And let me just take the lighting back to normal. Sorry, and then take a points from volume. And I'll get it down to say 0.04. No, lower still. So 0.01. Yeah, okay. And give it a little bit of jitter. Okay, so this is good. And then we'll just set up our particle network. So let's take a pop network. And this comes into the second input and the points come into the first. Let's jump in. We'll take the source and I'm going to set it to all points. So what you'll get is you'll just get, particles generating on this. Okay, so the first thing I want is I want to take the birth and life expectancy is down to about 2 seconds, a little bit of variation. And the impulse activation, we want to end at around 72, the same as the smoke simulation. So we'll do $FF less than 72. So this is fine. Like we have a fair bunch of particles forming. Okay, and now I just want to move this. So I'll just take the, I'll just type in advect. So you'll get advect by volume. Let's drop that in. This will be second context geometry. And let's set this to update velocity and keep it to 1. And I'll just lower the velocity scale like a little bit. If you press play, we should see this. Now it will sort of automatically fall down and do all of its stuff. Let's do one thing. For now, I'm going to bring this up to 0.02. So it's not as dense. We'll increase it later. And within the pop network also, I'll come to the cache and make it around 10. So it can sort of store. Yeah, so if I press play, there you go. Okay, what I can also do is let's come into the points from volume and we can animate the the jitter seed, so it sort of keeps moving for every frame. So I'll just do $F over there. So it just so your jitter seed keeps animating, and that will affect our overall simulation. So if you press play, see, so you'll get this. Okay, and then let's do one thing. Like I wanted to hit the ground, like this goes a little below the ground. So let's take a ground plane and we'll merge these together. And I can also just apply a gravity for for fun. So I'll just take a gravity over here. And I want to like hide the ground plane. So if you press play, then see it won't like go below the ground, which is good. And you're getting like this nice little, maybe like lower the gravity a bit. So I'll just take the gravity and make it, I don't know, like let's do -2. So it doesn't fall down too much. Yeah, see, so it is mostly straight. Okay, now let's set up the colors, like just the basic stuff. So I'm going to I'll just take a color. And what I want to do is I just want to set up the alpha. Okay, the basic color, we'll set it up on the outside. So I just want to set up the alpha and like let's reverse it. But what I also want to do is I don't want to see these points in the beginning. So I can set it up here and get rid of the points in the beginning like that. So this will look a lot nicer. See. And I can just take this a little higher like that. See, this is the reason why you want to set color and alpha on the outside and not here, because every time you make a change, you have to resimulate. So that's always a lot of work. Okay, so let's do one thing. Let's just increase the point count to 0.01 and we'll just run the simulation. So I'll just go till the end and let it run the simulation. Yeah, so if we press play, we get this. Yeah, that looks pretty dense. Okay, so now let's just color it. So let's come back to geometry level. Firstly, we'll take a blast and I'll get rid of the ground. So we'll set this to points and delete source first input and delete non-selected. Okay, and then let's take a wrangle and we'll calculate speed. So I'll set it on speed. Okay, so we'll do f at speed is equal to length of at v. Okay, and then let's set up some color. So we'll take color and I'll just set it to speed. There you go. Okay, so what I want to do is let's get the speed up to around 10. Yeah, so it's like this, and like I can just bring this in a little bit. So let's make this really bright. So we'll make it like a little greenish, and this should be maybe like a blue. And then the first node, I'll jump it up to around 5. Yeah, so just like let's adjust this a little bit lower. Let's get it down to 5. Okay, there you go. See, this looks nice. Yeah, so this gives you a pretty decent look overall. Maybe I should get the sweep to be slightly bigger. Let's recalculate. Yeah, so there we go. We have our portal. Okay. You can adjust the colors, make it look slightly better. Like let's try one of the standard colors that we have. So let's try like two-tone. Okay, that looks nice. Let's try to flip it. No. Okay. Yeah, I think that looks, oh, there you go. That looks pretty decent. And we can try to blend it a little better. Yeah, so if we get a decent, camera angle on this. So there's your basic portal. All right, so the next lesson is again going to be a small project. We're going to use the velocity fields again, but for something slightly different. Okay, so we're going to use it on terrains and like have particles move along the flow fields that a terrain generates.